Hello everybody, this is a video to talk to you about paragraph development, and it's using a strategy that's called meal plan. So this is a strategy that you may have heard of before. I know that it's used quite frequently in the Writing Center, and I've also seen it called a lot of other different things. Different acronyms have been used and that sort of thing. So if you've ever heard of kind of this similar strategy for paragraph development, it's just another way of thinking about it and a way to get you to consider how your paragraphs are constructed and help you have really well-developed paragraphs. So a thing to keep in mind is that when you're writing, especially argumentative papers, especially papers that are analysis projects, anything that's using source material or relying on your analysis of a subject, developing those paragraphs is really a challenging but rewarding task. So it's important for making your argument, for making your analysis, and for demonstrating that you've not only done your research, but you've also done some critical thinking about your topic and are doing more than just plugging in source material or kind of rambling about your topic. This is really where the thoughtful and well-constructed writing comes in. So if this is something you struggle with, hopefully this strategy will give you a way to approach development, a way to approach writing supporting paragraphs in a way that is helpful to you. So just for quick review, and we've talked about this already, your thesis is really the glue that is holding your project together. It's what's holding your argument or your analysis together. The main idea of your project should be housed in your thesis. The thesis statement states what your claim is, and it holds the rest of your essay together. So a big problem that happens a lot in ineffective writing pieces is the thesis is kind of just mentioned in the introduction, or maybe even not mentioned at all, but it's not referred to again. And so we're going to talk in this video about how to make sure your thesis is present throughout your project. I like to think of the thesis as kind of the mortar that's holding the building bricks of your project together. So you could stack up a bunch of bricks to make a wall, but it's not going to stay together if you don't have mortar in between it. So the bricks being your paragraphs or your supporting material, and the mortar is your thesis. If you don't have that mortar, you don't have it to glue those bricks together, it's going to fall apart. It doesn't have a lot of substance to it. So for the purposes of this video, I've created a sample series of thesis statements and then also paragraphs that I'll just be demonstrating kind of what this whole process looks like. So for the purposes of this video, the thesis statement I'm working with is: universities need to provide more support and services to students trying to apply for and maintain their financial aid status, while keeping in mind students' financial priorities are varied and complex. So I'm making an argument about the kind of support that universities need to provide for students, especially those who have different financial needs, and keeping those in mind. That's my main thesis, my main argument that I'm making. It's likely that this is the sentence that I'm using maybe in the last sentence of my introduction paragraph. This is the clearly stated, very concise way of wording my argument, but it's not the only way I should refer to my argument throughout my project. It's just the first one. So now I'm going to move on and start talking about a supporting paragraph. So this is the method that you'll be seeing me use for the rest of the video. It's color coded for ease of sight, and it's a strategy that I recommend using when you're actually going back and creating or revising your projects. So the first thing that we want to do when we're writing a body paragraph to support our thesis is introduce the claim we're making with a main point. This is the M of the meal plan. Usually observations are the first sentence in a paragraph. They should introduce the claim and contain some kind of transition. So your first body paragraph might be using a very standard kind of transition, something like first of all, or firstly. And then after that point, you should be going for some additional sort of complex transitions. And we'll talk more about that elsewhere in the course. But keep that in mind that a transition is an aspect of that main point. So then the rest of the main point should literally be describing what the rest of this paragraph is going to be about. It's almost like a mini thesis for your paragraph. It's often thought of as the topic sentence. If you've heard that before, that's really what the main point is all about. So some examples here might be, first of all, that's my transition, adequate financial aid can help retain new students at a university. That would be a main point that I could use to introduce a new paragraph. Another example might be, unlike providing campus services, there's my transition, contacting students over breaks and via email provides support for students beyond their campus lives. So in each of those sentences, I'm providing a transition, but I'm also describing what the rest of my body paragraph is going to be about. The second piece of meal plan is evidence. So this is the E. It's using a source plus a signal verb to introduce evidence that supports the main point that is related to the main point or the main argument that you're making in the body paragraph. So all of the source material you're using should directly relate back to that main point. This can be a place where things fall apart sometimes if they're not properly contextualized, if it's not tailored to the specific main point of the paragraph. So remember, you don't want to just plug in any old source material, and you don't want to just drop in quotes that are not contextualized, that are not explained. So using a signal verb as well as any proper citation information is incredibly important here. And I've included two examples to build on our examples from the main point. So in that first one, remember it's about providing adequate financial aid to retain new students. In fact, Myers points out that financial aid is, quote, the #1 concern of all new students, end quote. And you'll see that I've included Myers' name, the year of publication there after the last name, and then the page number that the quotation appears on in the source at the end of the sentence. So I've included Myers points out, that's my signal phrase to introduce the quotation, and I've provided citation information so that my readers can easily find which source I'm referring to and find that quotation within the source if they choose to go look it up. This is vital. So whenever you're using source material, it doesn't matter how little or how much you're using, you must cite it. This is essential. If you're not providing attribution, you're not providing citation information, you are guilty of plagiarism. And it can be very unintentional, but it does happen. And one of the main ways to avoid this is to include as many signals that refer to that source as possible, using the author's name in the sentence, using a in-text citation at the end of the sentence is essential. If you ever have any struggles with source material integration, issues with citations, please don't hesitate to contact me and ask for additional help. I'm happy to provide it. There's also great resources on both APA and MLA formatting in our Canvas shell. The second paragraph, I've added a paraphrase rather than a quotation to introduce some source material. And I've done that just so you can see how it looks in a slightly different way. So remember that second paragraph is about contacting students over breaks and via email to provide support. I've included this evidence. Parkins and Harp point out that most students felt comforted knowing their university cared about their well-being. So notice how that paraphrase is referring exactly to the kind of intervention I'm advocating for in that topic sentence. I'm mentioning that it's a good idea to contact students over break and via email, and I'm pointing out that Parkins and Harp have done research, have discussed this, and here's what they found. They're agreeing with me that this is something that benefits students. And notice how, because I didn't include the year after Parkins and Harp, I've included it in the in-text citation with a page number. So even when you're doing a paraphrase, you still need to provide evidence of citation and where that evidence is coming from. The third aspect of meal planning is analysis. This is essentially what the support, the evidence that you're using, means. What is it all about? And this should be in your voice. Keep in mind that I'm using a very brief example here. I'm trying to make it so they can all fit on these images on your screen. But your analysis and your evidence might be more than just a line apiece. You might have several lines of analysis and several different pieces of evidence included in your paragraphs. This is just one example to show you very briefly what it can look like. So don't feel like you have to limit yourself to one source, one paraphrase, or one sentence of analysis. That's definitely not the case. In fact, it's better to include some additional evidence and analysis. But for our purposes, I'm showing you just one sample. So in that first example, again, it's about financial aid and why it's important for students. So in my analysis, I've said students are money focused, meaning that finances play a pivotal role in their decision to withdraw or stay in school. So I'm building on my main point and I'm building on the evidence. I'm not just restating it. I'm furthering the conversation. I'm adding on to it. In that second example, you'll see that I'm also furthering the conversation. So although finances are important to students, they also value feeling like a person rather than just a number. So I'm articulating why contacting students over breaks and over email, beyond just in their courses, why that's important. I'm building on it in my own voice. And in both of those examples, there's plenty more that I could talk about to build on that argument further, but that's just a simple example of what the analysis might look like. The last thing that you want to do in every paragraph that you're writing of support is provide a link, the L of meal planning. Connect it back to your thesis. So this is the mortar, this is the glue that's holding your project together and that's helping guide your readers through your essay. Remember that it's not always straightforward. You're making your argument and might think it seems obvious, but it might not be obvious to your reader. You need to make sure you're articulating why this paragraph belongs in your project, why it matters, and what it's doing here. Remember that your readers need to be explained to them. It's necessary for them to understand your argument and why it supports your bigger thesis that you've included. So in the first example, I've added a link that is, if students are concerned about their finances, as Meyer claims, universities should focus on creating financial support for students if they want to retain incoming freshmen. So I've done a couple things there. I've re-articulated the main point. I've also referred back to my source material, my evidence, and I referred all the way back to my thesis statement. So I'm linking throughout the paragraph and back to the introduction. In the second example, I've included a link as well. If universities want students to stay in school, they must realize students have rich lives outside of campus that should be valued and enriched. So remember that my whole project is about retention and what universities should do to retain students. So if universities want students to stay in school, that's the retention, that's my main argument. Here's what they have to do. They have to realize students have rich lives that need to be valued by the university. There's my link. So keep in mind as well that you can introduce evidence in various ways. So in APA specifically, there are several different ways you can introduce your source material, and they each have their own benefits, and it's really about just what style you think benefits you. But you do need to include the same pieces of information for the most part throughout any kind of styles of introducing your sources. So in the first example, I've introduced not only my author's name, but also the article. So this might be relevant if you have multiple sources by the same person, if you find the title to be particularly relevant. I've used the article title there as well as the author's name, but I've also included the year after their last name and then a signal phrase to introduce that paraphrase. You'll notice too that I've included the page number at the end of the sentence to provide attribution to the spot in the source that this information is coming from. In that second example, I'm using just the author's last name, but I'm still using a signal phrase to introduce the quotation that I'm including as evidence. I'm also still including the page number at the end in an in-text citation. In the third example, I haven't used the author's name in the sentence because I've sort of blended the evidence in with my phrasing. This happens a lot if you're using your own voice to introduce some material. As a result, I still need to include all of that information, but I've got to put it in my in-text citation instead. So you'll see that I have the author's name, followed by the year of publication, and then followed by the page number where the quotation appears. Remember that for all the evidence you use, every source needs to have a reference included on the references page in APA. You can find more examples of references, of ways to cite in the Purdue OWL website. It's a great place to go for additional support, and there are, again, some really strong references that are linked, or resources that are linked in our Canvas site. So remember, each paragraph that you're writing needs to include 4 things: a main point that has a transition, evidence using at least one source with a citation and signal verb, and remember that might look like many more sources than just one. You can use more than just one source, more than just one quotation or paraphrase, but all of them need to be cited appropriately and integrated with signal verbs or other context. Then you need to analyze what that support and evidence means. Don't just drop in a quotation and not explain it. It's important that you use your own voice to articulate why that evidence matters and how it relates to the point that you're making. Finally, make sure you're including a link and connecting that support back to your thesis statement. Remember that this is the mortar that holds the rest of your project together. Your readers need to understand how this paragraph supports the main argument that you're making, and they can't do that if you don't articulate it to them. A method that I like to recommend is applying this meal planning to your own project. So go through your project and highlight in your essay meal planning. Do you have a main point, evidence, analysis, and a link in each of your body paragraphs? Use a different color and highlight each of those aspects in each of your body paragraphs. Then look over your project. Do you seem to be lacking in one of the 4 components? For example, did you highlight your evidence in orange and you're not seeing a lot of orange in your essay? Think then about how you could revise to include that component or amp up or contextualize it a bit more. Using highlighting is a great way to see at a glance what you seem to be missing. It's also a good way to go back and build in and revise some more of whichever aspect it is that you could improve on.